Hey, welcome into the Husker247 HoopsCast. And if you are listening, give yourself a round of applause. Nebraska basketball has lost 6 straight games, but you, sir or madam, are a big enough fan to want to tune into a Nebraska basketball based podcast. I am Mike Schaefer, joined by Brian Christopherson. We're part of Husker 24/7. Brian, I did not see this coming. After Nebraska lost, obviously, to USC, that made it more likely because winning at Wisconsin was going to be difficult. But I don't know that I would have pegged that this team would have lost 6 straight games. And now, unfortunately, they look as discombobulated as they have at any point in the last 3 years. And that's a big concern. It's a big concern. Is there anything you can say right off the cuff to make people feel a little bit better about 6 straight losses?
No, I don't think so. No, that's it. I mean, I'm like you though. When they were 12-2, I understand the people who will just say, "Well, it was all smoke and mirrors all along. They hadn't played anybody." But like 25 minutes into the Iowa game, I remember having the thought, like, "Man, I kind of like how this team's like put
Yep.
together." Like it felt like the stuff that Fred Hoiberg was talking about in press conferences was on the floor, and it wasn't the same as last year. It wasn't as pretty, but you're like, they're gonna kind of battle their way through this and win 10 or 11 games in the league and be back where they were a year ago. And it's just fallen off a cliff. And I mean, we've had text exchanges sometimes, if you flip, there were those 4 close games, they all lost. And if you flip 2 of them that are like sort of one possession deals, it's a different conversation, but they didn't. And part of the reason they didn't is they do lack sort of that dynamic ability, like in those moments, aside from a player or two, to have different options. I feel like last year, you could turn to 4 or 5 guys, or you always sort of thought, oh, this. You actually didn't know which random guy was going to step up on a given night, and now you just don't. You just don't have that confidence. There is that random guy.
Yeah, in these 6 losses, there's only been 2 games where they had absolutely no chance. And even then, I would argue the Wisconsin game, they played themselves right back there at 24-21. And the bugaboo rears its head again where your offense just cannot seem to score. And Bryce Williams is in a funk right now. He doesn't look like the same guy that was dominating in Hawaii or was taking apart Indiana or played well in the second half against UCLA. It is a team that seems to lack any kind of consistency on offense. You don't know if Connor Essegian is going to find it that night or not. You don't know what Jawan Gary is going to do. He could go for 27 points or he could go 6 of 21 and miss a bunch of layups. They seem to be the worst imaginable team at putting a ball off of a backboard and then having it hit a rim. Any part of the rim, it's going to come off. If it doesn't magically go right through the cylinder, Nebraska just can't seem to make layups. They're tough to watch right now. Like it's one thing that you're losing, it's another thing that it feels like everything is difficult. Every aspect of offense for this team is difficult. To say nothing of the fact that teams are just lighting them up from behind 3 point range more often than not right now. And so Nebraska has issues on all fronts. But the thing that I just keep coming back to is even if they were playing better defensively, I just worry that offense really has bottomed out in a way that I didn't think it was going to get to. I thought they were a little bit protected from that. I thought they would be a little bit more consistent. And I thought Bryce Williams was going to be able to kind of handle this run of being the guy on a team. And I know he's not getting a ton of help all the time, but he's also not making it easier on himself as well.
Well, they even tried a different lineup off the start. Obviously, it didn't work out well because it was 19-2 5 minutes into the game. But they had Bryce starting at the point. Sam Hoiberg was out there. Andrew Morgan. I like the Morgan move for sure. Getting him in there right off the jump. But yeah, when you fall behind by 17 points on the road, even though they had that surge, any coach knows that it's so difficult because basically you expended all this energy to get it back just a close, and then the other team counter punches, and then you're done dealing like they were in that game. But what was also frustrating, Schaefer, was when they got it to 24-21, they had, again, 2 possessions in a row where they have a miss handoff, and it gets stolen and it ends up a pick 6 on the other end. Points off turnovers were 17-3 in favor of Wisconsin. They were 16-6 in favor of USC the game before that. Hoiberg always talks, this isn't a team with margin for error. I mean, he's blunt about it. And when you continually lose that stat and you give up 3 possessions a half, or 2 or 3 of them, where it's here's 6 points on a platter, you're not going to win. You just you have no chance when you're this type of team built as Nebraska is.
Yeah, and we saw it. I mean, we certainly saw it on Sunday. I guess my issue with making Bryce your point is, doesn't that just sort of double down on one of his biggest issues, which is turnovers? I mean, you're asking him to be a ball handler and a facilitator, and frankly, that is one of the biggest weaknesses of Bryce games. It's why close and late is somewhat problematic, because you want the ball in his hands, and he's the most likely to turn it over of anybody on Nebraska's roster. It's a very tough line to walk, putting him in that position and then expecting that it won't lead to more of some of the issues you already have when you have a point guard on the court.
Well, I wonder if some of it is, Raleigh Wooster and Aaron Eulis, they've had moments, but neither one of them are a finisher on offense. So when they're out there, you don't we see a lot where Raleigh will drive it in and he'll get within, 7 feet of the bucket, but it has to kind of turn around and they have to reset it because he doesn't get the shot off or whatever. And, maybe the idea is you put Bryce out there, you have a scorer at that position. Sam gives you sometimes a real good plus minus with his defense, and Morgan gives you more offensive upgrade than Braxton Mia. So I don't know. It's one of those deals I think you're doing where you're throwing stuff. It's not blindfolded, but it's hey, you're on a skid. Let's see if this can inject something. If we can find sort of a formula of guys where this rotation works better than the previous one did. And yeah, it didn't work in that game. And part of it was Wisconsin came out on fire. But again, Nebraska is, I think we can't say it's coincidental that teams just light up Nebraska from beyond the arc. I think it's the Husker
open looks.
Yeah, they're late to the rotations on stuff. They're not making those passes when they double up in the post, be looping passes that take time where you get a guy over there. That's what they did really effectively, against Creighton, against Kalkbrenner. They were just so intense getting to him with the double, and every pass he had to get out of there was deflected, or it had to be sort of airmailed with some height to it where it gives you time to move your defense around. And it feels like lately that just hasn't been the same.
Yeah, and some of that is the teams that you're playing just don't have a Kalkbrenner. They don't have a low presence that you're worried about having to double in the posts. They are able to play through their backcourt a little bit more, and that leaves you more susceptible to some of these open 3-pointers. I am fascinated as to what counterpunch, if anything, Fred Hoiberg can kind of try to put together, because the other part of this is Nebraska's schedule is starting to lighten up, and laugh about that if you will, but they have better opportunities moving forward. And so to me, the season isn't dead in the water. I think the opportunity to get the NCAA tournament has likely come and passed without a magnificent run over your final, 11 games here. And so we'll see if they're able to kind of pull anything back together as you take on a Washington on the road, where I think Nebraska would have an opportunity to win that game. Ohio State at home, where I think Nebraska is going to have opportunities to win that game. You're going to get Minnesota later on in the year. You're going to have these games where you have a chance to win. Nebraska's goal has to be right now, Brian, just to get to the Big Ten tournament. That's not a given anymore.
Yeah, you got to be in the top 15. Right now they're on the outside looking in of that. There is possibilities with the schedule down the stretch, but the way they're playing right now, there's no givens at all on there. Before the Wisconsin game, I wrote this because I felt it was true. For those people who were still kind of hoping about the NCAA tournament, Nebraska was still appearing going into last weekend on like the first 4 out list and stuff. And so Wisconsin, Illinois on Thursday, and Oregon this Sunday are all quad 1 games within the top 23 of the net. So I had the sentence where it's like, this is a bad thing for a team that's struggling. They're playing that type of competition. This is a good thing because you could
It's opportunity.
you took one, or if you somehow took 2, which seemed like a far dream, but you just throw it out there because why not be a competitor about it or say anything can happen in sports? But then suddenly you're back like with a swagger in your step. Well, you already had one where you really took it on the chin. So, and I feel like Thursday is going to be tough too because Illinois, they think they have a Final Four team. Like Underwood thinks he has a Final Four team there, and they've had some injuries and stuff like that. But they're in that point in their season where they're like, all right, let's show we're that type of team. That's who Nebraska has to deal with on Thursday at PBA. So it's not going to be easy.
Illinois has also just been one of those teams that I think has been a struggle for Fred Hoiberg, regardless of what iteration he has had to face. Nebraska's played them close and tight at times, but they haven't, to my knowledge, have they beaten
I
Illinois
don't
under
remember.
Hoiberg?
Yeah, I don't.
I don't think they have.
Maybe not. I'll have to look at that stat. But I mean,
They've gone to overtime
last year's
twice.
game, they're hurt. Obviously
Yep.
with the tough call at the end, but they lost it, and so I'm not sure that they have. That was one of the best versions of Nebraska against Illinois that I can remember. That game there last year. I thought that, and then the Huskers had a great run in the final like 3 minutes to take the lead after being down double figures. But right now you just got to wonder where this team's head is at, because they did, for fair reason, like us, like 3 weeks ago, they saw themselves a certain way and believed this was on a certain path. And right now, everybody is sort of waving their hands and like, you guys are done. I mean, that's what the outside perception is. That's always difficult in sports when people are turning the channel on you a little bit to keep going in and say, we believe in ourselves, or this can work, or that can work, and fight your way out of it. It's the most rewarding thing when a team does it on occasion, when they do fight their way out of that hole, but it's rare and it's hard.
Yeah, and it's going to require a level of leadership. They're going to have a player leader step up that can kind of pull that team together and get it to focus in the right direction. And I think that's Shawan Gary, but the messaging has been on point after games, but the results on the court haven't matched up, and that's a difficult thing. And Hoiberg can tinker and he can try to do different stuff, but you have to get those guys finding some confidence and then playing with it and then finishing games. They've had opportunities in this stretch, in these 6 losses, to finish games, and they're essentially 0 for 4 in those opportunities late in the second half, and all of them they've let those games get away from them, and so they cannot do that again, or overtime for Iowa, for the one that kicked off this entire thing. So they're mentally, you wonder if they have the confidence to be able to step up and play an Illinois team, and then if they do have a lead in the second half, will they be able to put a game away? Will they be able to have a 4-point lead with 2 minutes left? Is Nebraska going to finish that game? Right now, I don't think they're the kind of team that can. I think that's part of the issue. They're not great from the free throw line. They're not great with ball handling against pressure. They're not great at getting stops when they need to. They're bad at the end of the half. They're bad at the end of games. I think there's a real symmetry there. And they've been bad essentially for both of those stretches across this 6-game losing streak.
Yeah, they've had these stretches where they're like good at the end from like 4 minutes to the 1 minute mark, and then that final minute it falls off. But yeah, it's tough. And the sort of aura that surrounded their streak at PBA right now is gone. Like you have to try to rebuild that from the ground, because the last 2 games you've lost at home. And so there was this feeling before that ended, like it's going to be tough for anyone to come in here and steal one. And now Illinois is looking at like, no, it can be done. And, USC did it, and Rutgers. So, there's a lot of things that are the currents are going against this team right now. The best you can hope for, I think, is somehow they pulled out one of these two, and then you'd say, all right, reset for this finish where there are openings and you have a quad one win. But there's not a lot of people that are going to predict that at this point.
No, they are not. No, they are not. Let's just jump right into guess a random Husker Hooper, unless you've got another topic you want to get to here with Nebraska basketball. I don't know that there's a lot more for us to dive into as they work through their struggles here, and we're certainly going to be back next week and with another podcast after these two games. But let's just jump right into our game show portion of this podcast.
Okay, this is a guy who's in like more of my wheelhouse years, but I think if you pay attention when they introduce the former Huskers at halftime, that when they come back, the alumni weekend, he's a guy that always sort of sticks out. And he was part of the first Danny Nee NCAA tournament team. He came back after
Bo Reed.
Okay, you got it. Fine. Make it no fun for anyone.
I mean, you threw a clue out. I went with one of the names that I had.
I think not to be rough on you, because you know that I'm on the other side on the guys like in the last 10 to 15 years where it's like it's got to be like one of three names. So I was thinking like, okay,
you're like worried you don't want to go too deep cut on me.
Yeah, so you hit it. You found what I was doing. You got in my brain, and Bo Reed. Quick about Bo Reed though. For those who don't remember, he had reconstructive knee surgery in 89-90, so he sat out before his senior year. And it's really kind of an interesting story how that run started, because they had a team sort of behind the scenes where they knew they were going to be good, like in that first NCAA run they had where they won 26 games. But nobody else on the outside could have even imagined it or thought about it, because I think they won like 10 games the year Bo was out. And it was just like so strange, because I was a kid who used to watch Nebraska play like on Raycom in the 80s, and you were just like, if they were within like 4 points of like Kansas State on the road or something, you're like, what the stink? You're like totally invested, like this could possibly happen just to win a game. So suddenly when Bo Reed's team that senior year made it to the tournament, it was just completely like being on another planet for some of us.
He wasn't the only one that redshirted that year. I mean, they
Nope.
some of the top freshmen, Nee just had him redshirt right away, right?
Yes, he did. And that's why they thought they were going to be good. They knew that those guys could ball, and that they'd put something together that people didn't know about. I think it was against Michigan State, if I remember right. Bo Reed, maybe it's Kansas. He had a game winner against somebody that was key. And he's like the player I most associate with his first NCAA tournament team.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, I think he's got a lot of name cachet. If I was able to just throw that one out right off the bat, kind of. But at the same time, I don't know that there'd be a lot of ones that struck me as obvious as sort of where you were starting your preamble with there. So,
yeah. Rich King was on the 90-91 team. Tony Farmer, do you know Tony Farmer? He was like really, he was 12.4, 7.4. Pike was obviously on that team. Carl Hayes was really good too. So yeah, I mean that ended up being a good team. Rich King, Farmer, and Pike.
That was a 3-seed team, right? Like they were the ones that lost to Penn.
Xavier. They lost to Xavier. Yeah. Okay. It was up in Minneapolis. It was the late game. I'm remembering this right. I'm like 95% sure. It was like the late game on Friday, like the 9 o'clock game, like one of the last ones. And they were behind almost the entire game. It was just completely frustrating.
I don't have a great frame of reference for who Nebraska lost to in the tournament for specific teams. I just know that it was like teams like Xavier, Penn. I think did they lose to? They lost to Arkansas with Tyronn Lue and Hamilton.
That was the closest they.
Yeah.
I mean, that was the game where they were ahead double digits with like 12 minutes left. It was a Nolan Richardson Arkansas team that it wasn't the same. Like they were definitely beatable. And Nebraska, I think if they played them 10 times, would have beat them 6 or 7. Like I really believe that. It just that one's the one that hurts a little bit. The other ones, they always were kind of just it started poorly
They
and
just get blitzkrieged. I mean, that's the
yeah.
last two.
Mm-hmm.
Texas A&M just destroys you. Baylor destroys you. You can't even get to the under 12 and still be in the game.
Although
like it's
the first like 8 to 10 minutes of last year's game in Memphis was like wildly entertaining. Like because
Nebraska started red hot.
Yeah,
but so did Texas A&M.
Yeah, A&M's doing all right. That I remember before that matchup, we were like, "Oh, I think that looks good for Nebraska." You're looking at their season stats. A&M struggled shooting the ball. A&M had started to figure out who they were, and they've used that trampoline into this
They
season.
had the guy who averaged like 4 points hit 5 3-pointers in the first half.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing that was frustrating to me about that too is that you look at how many teams got the same seed as Nebraska from the Big Ten, and then like Northwestern's matchup would have been better. Michigan State's matchup would have been better. The other 8-9 game felt more winnable, and Nebraska gets the super athletic team from the SEC. For a Nebraska team where athleticism was the big bugaboo last year, we saw it with Illinois in that Big Ten semifinal game. Shannon just went to the hole every single time, and they couldn't get in front of them.
Nebraska also, I'm thinking of tournament teams. They got UConn one year as like an 8-9 game.
Okay.
It's forgettable. Like it was such a bad matchup too. UConn was still like, really built up
Jim
as a
Calhoun
program
at that point.
Yeah, they were a good program.
They weren't stealing laptops and all the other stuff they were doing at the end of his tenure.
I don't know if they're doing that. Well, probably not then yet. No, they were. I don't know. They're stealing stealing like Burger King gift cards or something. I don't know what we did in that era, but that was some bad draws. That's all we'll chalk it up.
Would Ray Allen have been on that UConn team?
I can't remember who was on it. What was that year? We'll have to discuss it. That could be like a discussion point next year. We could just next week we could have like a tournament. We've kind of done it, but we could go through like one game at a time if really press people.
We could we could have a fun off-season podcast where we just go through the favorite, or maybe not favorite, but memorable opposing teams that Nebraska has played or opposing game. Like,
oh yeah,
I will never forget watching Kevin Durant in the Bob Devaney Sports Center in that game against Texas, and then I think it was Marcus Perry shut him down like the 10-minute mark on in the second half. He didn't score. So I have more of the recent Big 12 and then certainly Big 10, but there's some really memorable opponents Nebraska has been able to go against because of playing in the Big 10 and the Big 12. I mean, it's kind of fortunate of who you get to see sometimes because of the Big 12. Less so in the Big 10. I mean, Edey, I guess, sort of stands out. A handful of other guys, but there hasn't been. It's not nearly as exciting as it was when they were in the Big 12 in terms of individual star players to me.
Yeah. That'd be fun. I was trying to figure out if I was just. I don't know. They played New Mexico State one year in the tournament and they lost 93-79. They had a little point guard that just chewed up Nebraska. Yeah, it's been teams like that.
We did the overtime podcast. Maybe we do the NCAA tournament podcast where we just talk through each one of Nebraska's losses, the statistical domination of which the other team had. Like, people would love that. That'd be great. I'm
trying to double check that I didn't misremember that they played UConn, but anyway.
I don't remember UConn, but I wouldn't know that era. Like I said, the only one that I can remember consciously watching was against Arkansas. And even then, I don't recall watching the entire thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I could be misremembering. But anyway, it's been rough when they get there.
Yeah. All right. Well, it's rough right now, and they're not there, and they probably won't get there this year. But we will see how Nebraska handles a week of Illinois and then Oregon. Illinois on Thursday, Brian, 7:30?
Yep, Thursday at 7:30.
Oregon is Sunday again?
It's Sunday night. They did play at UConn. I'm glad. 91-92. They lost 86-65, so I was right. That was Danny Neat's second NCAA tournament team.
Okay. BC ends the podcast on a victory for his memory.
I was worried. I was really freaking worried that I just completely imagined that they played UConn. But
he's dropping a frickin', folks. He is a little worried. That's
yeah.
You know, he's a little agitated over there. But BC's memory is good as it ever was. So that's what we got for you this week for basketball. We'll be back next week. We'll see if Nebraska can get off the losing streak. Give us some good things to talk about.
Yeah.
Change the conversation a little bit. That'd be nice. We'll see if it happens. Otherwise, spend your time at Husker247.com. Plenty of stuff going on over there. Of course, all the football coverage, transfer portal coverage still going on, recruiting coverage, basketball coverage, baseball coverage, everything you want and need. Husker247.com.